Everybody to the latest Voices of Sample Management. Today I have another esteemed guest, Neil Benn from previously Rack Scanner fandom. He's just finished working for all those companies, but he has a lot of knowledge in the area, so we shall be talking about barcoded tubes, rack scanners, etc. Neil, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's, as you just said, Neil Benn. I used to be the founder and managing director of Ziath, which was acquired by Azenta Inc. a couple of years ago. Previous to that, I worked in sample management, lab automation for companies such as Cambridge Antibody Technology, which is now AstraZeneca, a startup in Germany, the Max Planck Institute, and GlaxoSmithKline. I've got about 30 years experience of tubes and rack scanners and sample management.
So definitely the expert to talk to. So you've seen it all.
Yeah. From meat freezers in the car park to highly automated systems costing tens of millions of pounds.
Excellent. You're the person to quiz on the world of sample management and tubes. So I suppose, I sort of remember, I've also been in the industry for quite a long time. These strange tubes with 2D barcodes on the bottom. Before, we'd all used to 1D barcodes, which we saw in shops and things. How did that come about, and how long ago are we talking?
So at the very start, if we go back 30 years, you've obviously got the 96 well rack tubes that you're used to seeing. 30 years ago, you couldn't actually get them filled with tubes. So my very first job is I had a pallet load of empty tubes and a pallet load of tubes, empty racks, pallet load of tubes. And I just filled them in. And then the first innovation was you could buy them pre-filled. So that was great. And then you had the 96 tubes. Now, if you've got 96 tubes with chemical compounds, what we had in those days, that rack is actually extremely expensive. The amount of time for medicinal chemists to put in to make those samples is huge. And if you dropped it, that's it. You're gone. And there were big penalties, and everyone was ever so careful to not drop it. And then the first things that happened is people started labeling the coordinates at the bottom of the tube, A1, B1, C1, and so on. So that means if you did drop it, you could at least pick them up and look at the bottom of the tubes and put them all back in again. And then as time went on, a couple of companies, at the time it was Matrix and Mycronic, both at about the same time launched 2D barcoded tubes, which is around about 25 years ago, roughly. And the idea was, obviously, is you've got a tiny barcode lasered on the bottom of a tube. And so if you can read those barcodes, you can put the tubes back in the rack. And really, it was about being able to put the tubes back in the rack. The concept of tracking it with the barcodes wasn't really developed. At the time, this was only available to very large companies because the racks were extremely expensive. And so they started coming in. They were targeting the big pharmaceutical companies, which in the 90s were extremely rich, such as Glaxo worked for, AstraZeneca, and so on, and obviously Pfizer. And then they started coming into what at the time was compound management. The thing that's quite interesting is, I won't say which company, but one company had what's called a data matrix barcode, which is open, you can get it everywhere. The other company had their own proprietary barcode. Only they could read it.
Right.
So that meant that if you bought their one, you were stuck with their tubes and their readers forevermore. The other company that didn't have their own proprietary barcode did far better. So at the start, the proprietary barcodes were introduced, but they didn't last more than a couple of years as customers were too switched on to not lock themselves into proprietary barcodes.
Right, yeah. Because they may want to share them with other companies and universities, etc. Yes.
Now, as time's gone on, the number of manufacturers of these tubes has ballooned.
Yes.
There's now at least 12, probably 20 different manufacturers of tubes. That's brought the price down.
Okay.
Which has meant that more people can meet the tubes, can get hold of the tubes, more people can use them. And in addition, the concept of biobanking appeared, which grew out of the concept of personalised medicine. Yeah. And then biobankers, compound management people were using 1 or 2 million tubes at the most, really. Biobankers, the big ones, are using 10 times that.
Right.
The concept of biobanking meant that those numbers of tubes went through the roof. And so that's depressed that price. And if you buy in quantity, you can get a vac full of tubes for about £50, even sometimes 30.
Okay. Depending on the tube, probably, but yeah.
Depending on the tube, yeah, and also the quantity. If you only want to buy 1,000, they're not going to do it. But if you want to buy over 1 million, then they will compete and get their price lower.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Cool. Thank you. I remember some of that thing. I also remember at Pfizer we had a laser etcher for the same problem, that if the side of the tube was etched with where its position in the rack was. And, yeah. Yes, they were impossible to read, the laser etching, so it wasn't that useful.
The ones at the bottom weren't much easier either, and they scratched off if you weren't careful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yes, less than ideal. Unfortunately, we've moved to a better place. So, are they all data matrix still, or are there combinations of those?
Yeah, at the time, there's two mainstream 3D barcodes you can get. It's QR codes and data matrix codes. You've obviously got to shrink these codes down really, really small. At the time, you couldn't shrink a QR code down small enough to get it on the bottom of a tube. So everyone started making data matrix codes. And it's the same in the electronics industry. Everyone uses data matrix codes, which has meant that all the people that made readers tuned them to data matrix codes.
Okay.
You can actually now shrink a QR code down low enough. It's called a micro QR code. And I have seen some people try to launch them. Problem is they don't work with any of the readers.
Right.
So very quickly go and go and use data matrix code again. So we're kind of locked into data matrix because of this. And the micro QR codes theoretically should be easier to read, but no one's going to reprogram their devices to read micro QR codes unless there's a very strong reason to do it, which there isn't.
No. Okay. Cool. And while we're on the topic of QR codes, is there an advantage to that? It can take you to a website or something like that rather than...
Theoretically, no. I mean, a QR code holds data just like a data matrix code does. A QR code is actually easier to read than a data matrix code. When you try to look for data matrix code and you're actually making a reader for it, you look for that pattern.
Right.
It's an L shape, basically. The problem is if you look around the room you're in, you can see a lot of L shapes everywhere.
Indeed, yes.
That's
the corner of the rack, for instance, and things like that.
Exactly. And so that's called the finder pattern. The micro QR code, when you look at a QR code, you'll see it's got a box surrounded by a white box surrounded by a larger black box.
Yeah.
That's the finder pattern for micro QR code. You're not going to see that anywhere easily. If you look around the room again, it's very rare to see that. So a QR code should be easier to read because the finder pattern is more unique for that. So if you were to make tubes now and you to invent 3D barcoded tubes and there's no precedence, you would use a micro QR code.
Right.
But apart from that, there's no basic inherent difference between the two.
But we've got 25 years of data matrix tubes, so yes,
yeah. So someone's going to have to bribe a rack scanner or pay a rack scanner company an enormous amount of money to get them to bother writing micro QR code stuff before he launched that tube.
Yes, yeah. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I suppose you've hinted at micro QR codes are easier to read, but why is it so hard to read 96 tubes at the bottom of a rack?
So
or maybe let's start even easier: single tube on a single tube reader rack.
So the first bit is that when you put a code on the bottom of a tube, it's actually really hard to get it perfect. If your laser's slightly too powerful, instead of a square, you'll burn a dot. If your laser's not powerful enough, instead of a square, you'll burn a diamond. Then you've got to get it positioned very, very tightly in that area. So then what it means when you read it, you should be getting lines and squares. You don't always get lines and squares. Sometimes you will. Sometimes the lasering went perfectly. Sometimes it didn't. It's not a denigration on the manufacturing of the tubes. It's just life for that. Okay. Yeah. So that means that you've got to take into account the fact that the laser might not have been perfect on that shot. The next thing is you can get reflections back on the bottom of the tube. And you can get reflections on the light. I've already talked about that L-shape issue. My favourite one was someone once, so you look for, there's various different ways of doing it, but you can look for an L shape and you can look for patterns of white and black to determine where the barcode is. I had one person who put their hand, which was bandaged for some reason, on the top of the rack, scanned it, and it got confused because he couldn't work out if it was bandage or barcode.
Right.
So essentially, in actual fact, finding the barcode is the harder bit. Once you found it, reading is quite difficult, and that's why we, Ziath, actually did an AI issue for that. It's AI that actually works. It's not going to tell you to make petroleum spaghetti or whatever the latest disaster is.
Take over the world or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It just recognises where the barcode is. But finding it's actually quite hard to do. Then, if you think about it, if you've got 96 tubes, it's the old adage of a watch kettle takes much longer to boil. If it takes longer than about a second, you notice when you're standing in front of it, which means you've got to image and decode these in about a second. If you take more than 3 seconds, it's going to really affect someone. And if you're working in a high throughput environment where you've got to scan 100 racks, 1 second versus 5 seconds, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you've got to scan them, image them, get the results back extremely quickly. So what happens, and everyone does this, and I did the same thing, is you start off going, this is going to be easy. And then after about a year and a half, we realised it's not. Background effects, trying to read them all, and so on, means it's actually much harder. Then what's happened recently, because the number of tubes has gone through the roof, every single tube is made slightly differently.
Right.
So therefore, even though it is just a data matrix code, some of them are burnt stronger, some of them are burnt greater contrast, some of them have got the lasers turned a bit too high, some of the lasers turned a bit too low. Some of them, the tubes are further down towards the bottom of the rack and some of them are higher up. So it means you've got a wide variety of different racks. If you're a rack scanner manufacturer, you can't say to someone, it works with this, not with that.
Yeah.
Back in the old days, you could have done that, but now you've got to go up to the customer and say, put any standard 96 volt rack on and we'll read it. And if as soon as you can't do that, then the customer's rightly so says, well, it's just 96 barcodes. It's just a barcode scanner. Why is it that hard? Right. So essentially, you've got to make it someone can walk up, no configuration, no messing around, and just read any rack off the shelf.
And I suppose you're saying it's hard to detect the barcode, but of course, I suspect you're talking about maybe the focal length is changing because of the way the rack is, the tube is, and the type of lasering that's happened to create the QR code. But it could also be the background lighting. You already talked about the bandaged hand or non-bandaged hand, but
lights directly on top of it.
Sunlight in the afternoon, not in the morning, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, when we QC rack scanners and we QC the AI particularly, we have angle poised lamps over it. We even once got a tablet, put the BBC 24 News on top of it, put the tablet face down.
Yeah. And
then had the scanner constantly reading the tubes with the BBC 24 News basically in the background to give us
changing the colours and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So you've got to cope with a wide variety of situations.
So the rack scanner manufacturers, how do they cope? Do they have laser focus lenses, or do they have clever software?
There's two different ways of doing it, but at the very start, you use flatbed scanners. Anyone that's aged over 40 will know what I'm talking about here. You used to get your photos developed from the camera roll film, and you could put it on the thing of flatbed scanner, and that would image it by running a bar across very slowly to capture the photo. Essentially, they produce very good, very high quality photos. They were the first things that were used by most scanner manufacturers, ourselves included. The problem is they're slow. The benefit is that they give you very, very good quality images. There's two different types of flatbed scans. We won't go into it in great detail, but one of them's got a deeper focus than the other. By focal range, I mean the point between there and there where the camera is still in focus. Outside of these 2 points is not in focus. The wider the better for reading barcodes. So most people use those at the start. One company actually did have a CCD camera, which is kind of like the old style camcorder things. But back in the day, that was quite hard to get it working, to get all the data down. Computers couldn't really handle it. As time went on, the advent of mobile phones means that there's a different type of camera called a CMOS camera, which came about. And so those cameras are much smaller. They need much less power to operate. And so this is now nearly everybody has camera-based readers, which then comes down to you take two choices. You can either have lower quality cameras, but better quality software, or higher quality cameras which don't need as good quality software. The difference is, and this is kind of a business term really, is the lower quality cameras are very cheap, the higher quality cameras are very expensive. So you can take a choice between the way in which you want to do them.
Okay, yeah.
And some people have chosen one, people have chosen the other. But if you can make the lower quality cameras work, obviously you've got a more sustainable company because your devices can be cheaper.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask about the photocopier technology, but you've already sort of explained that sort of thing.
I mean,
it's the quality of the picture that is the important bit.
And they still give very good quality pictures, probably better than a lot of the cameras.
Right.
But you also this kind of technology is dying out.
Yes.
So there is still one available you can buy, which is actually used to scan passports in hotels. And
right.
You can still buy that scanner, but it will take quite a long time to scan the rack. So it's kind of seen as old-fashioned now.
Yeah, because I remember, you know, 3 position. You know, you had this thing that was built to do A4 type scanning, and you had a plastic guide over the top to put 3 racks on, or 4, maybe even 4 racks.
When we QC our scanners, we run about 30 odd racks 3 times to QC every single scanner. This is a perfect example of why the flatbed scanners aren't there, because you put it on and it goes zzz, and you've got to do that 100 times. It takes half a day to QC that old scanner.
Right, yeah.
So it's a perfect example of why, even though the images are arguably better quality than the cameras you get, it's a perfect example of why they're not really sold anymore, even if you could get hold of the core technology.
Yes, yeah, okay. A thing of the past. Yes, so I suppose, you know, the camera technology improved. You know, what about the lighting? You know, I remember the advent of LED lighting and all this sort of thing suddenly must have improved things.
Yeah, so if you think when you go to a wedding, right, and they finish the wedding and you go and take the photographs of the bride and the groom, etc., they've got these big blue, white things shining it all down to get the lighting perfect. It's exactly the same with the back scanners.
Okay.
So the lighting that you have matters a lot. So what we decided to do when we made our back scanners was to throw an enormous quantity of light at the target being the bottom of the tube. So that theoretically can block out any background lighting that we've got. However, the problem is that if you shine an enormous amount of light at something, that you can get an enormous amount of light reflected right back at you.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do this, you've got to position the lights very, very carefully. And in actual fact, at Ziath, we actually patented how the lights were arranged in that system. But however you do it, you've got to position the light a lot at the target.
Right.
Or you have to have some way of having a longer exposure to balance out the background lighting. But if you look inside the scanners, the cameras, to a large extent, are very similar these days. But if you look at the lighting, they've all got very interesting ways in which the lighting's arrayed out, and a lot of time, effort, and design goes into that.
Right. Okay. So it's Yeah, not so much about your telephoto lens, more about the flash units that you got when you take the picture. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Cool.
So turn it on without a rack on and have a look inside. Be aware, some of the Ziath scanners you might kind of be like coming at the cinema doing this once you've finished.
Yes, yeah, they are fairly bright. Yes, yes. And I suppose that also a trend is, I remember, the flatbed scanners, and scanners used to be, sort of, a chocolate brownie sort of thickness, if you like. But now they're more, you see more and more cube shaped. They almost seem to have a longer focal length, or is that?
Yeah, that's the flatbed scanner issue. The flatbed scanners don't need that kind of a length, but you've got two issues. One is the minimum focal length of the camera. Yeah. Where so if you get your mobile phone or your cell phone and try and take a picture of your hand at that distance, you can't do it. So that's them. The other one is the depth of cone. So essentially, if my camera's seeing like that, that's the cone I'm making for it. If you've got the cone a certain distance away, that means this is how much of the focal target you can see. So if you look in some of the devices, a few of them have got more than one camera. You don't necessarily need more than one camera for resolution purposes. You need it because if I can take only half of the back, it means I can make the thing shorter and shorter and shorter, which is why when you see them, they've either got one camera in, or they're very tall, or they've stuck a mirror in to shorten the height of it. But it's an issue of balancing out the minimum focal depth, how much the target I can see, and how many cameras have I got in there. So one device has got 4 cameras in them. I think one doesn't exist anymore. We used to have 8 in it.
Right. Okay.
But they're all doing it to try and get that height down. The reason is if you're going to stick it on a liquid handler, you don't want a skyscraper on the liquid handler because it causes problems.
Yeah. Yes. Especially if you've got a tall set of tubes as well. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, is there anything else we should mention about that technology? What about what's the best things you can do to keep your rack scanner working well, or your tube scanning well? I suppose the obvious one is you're taking them out of a -80 freezer and the tube's covered in frost. That's not going to help.
Okay, so for the actual scanner, keep the glass clean.
Okay.
Clean it with water. Don't clean it with alcohol or fluids or whatever, because essentially you'll end up damaging the surface of the scanner. You wouldn't clean your laptop monitor with detergent or bleach. Don't do it the same for this. So keep that glass clean. The next thing that you want to do for the racks coming out of the freezer is different companies approach this in different ways, but make sure that you test out any kind of condensation you get on the rack scanner. Now, what happens is if you put a cold rack on a warm surface, you get condensation. Fine. Right? That's obvious. Then you get condensation on the top of the glass. It's fine, just wipe it off with a bit of tissue. But you'll get condensation on the inside. And because there's no air current, no breeze through there, that condensation can take quite a long time to disappear. All it is just the moisture in the box inside the scanner collecting on the bottom of the screen. When it evaporates, it just goes back into the atmosphere. But you've got to find some way of ensuring it doesn't happen. And different companies have got coatings, some have got heaters, some have got fans, which essentially is a heater anyway, really, to try and stop it. But make sure that you bear that in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is, despite what they will tell you, it's not 100% proof. Right. So if you're going to scan a lot of -80 racks, take the rack off after this image. Don't leave it on the scanner, causing the scanner to get colder and colder and colder. Put it on, do the scan, take it off, and that will make sure the scan doesn't get down to anywhere close to -80. Right. The next thing is the ice on the bottom of the rack. If you've got ice covering a barcode, the machine can't read it.
Yeah.
Right. And there's nothing you can do about it. We can get to other alternative technologies later for that, but essentially the machine can't read it. If you get something and wipe it like that, essentially what you're doing is you're going to leave streaks on the bottom of the rack as soon as you finish wiping it. Okay. That's not going to work either. You could heat it up and the ice will disappear. However, you generally don't really want to be heating up your tubes because that's why you had him in the -80 in the first place.
Yes.
So the best thing that we did, and I had this problem when I was in the lab. I was working in Germany, so I went across the road to Netto, which is kind of like Lidl for people who don't live in Germany, and I bought a Bob das Baumeister lunchbox. To the people that don't speak German, that's Bob the Builder, by the way.
Okay.
Got a few tissues, got some lab ethanol, which freezes at -96, and then basically made that damp. Tapped the rack onto the ethanol, which melted the ice off the tubes because you then had a combination of water and ethanol, so it melted it.
Yeah.
Put it on the scanner and scanned it. So essentially, I set up a little station of a Bob the Baumeister ethanol rat scanner in the middle, and then a Bob the Baumeister drying sponge station at the end. And so you went plonk, plonk, plonk on the 3 scanners.
Right.
When I used to work at Ziath, people kept saying, "Why can't you sell that to us?" I tried to explain, but by the time I've bought a kid's lunchbox and stuck it in a box and shipped it to you, it'll be a lot quicker if you just go to the supermarket and buy a kid's lunchbox yourself. There are some machines now that have taken that to another level. There's one which has got ethanol, an ethanol sponge and a drying sponge on kind of a roll that you roll it along. But the same thing is the same way is get the ethanol at the bottom of the back by dabbing it, not wiping it.
Yeah.
And then you can get the ice off and get it on the scanner.
But the ethanol's not going to damage the QR code, because of the chemicals or something.
No, we haven't had any that have been damaged by it. I used to use the particular type of rack that I used to use to do this. I'm not going to say whose it is. That's the most acceptable for ethanol damage in the bottom of the tubes, and we didn't get it.
Okay.
I dare say if you soaked it in ethanol and then scrubbed it with an iron brush, it will damage it.
Right.
But if you're just going to tap it on there, then essentially it's easy to do.
Yeah, then you're gonna scan and then stick it back in the -80 freezer anyway to protect the samples, aren't you? So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I did once have a go using glycerol, which lasts longer, but they ended up just dropping glycerol inside the tanks and the freezers, and so then I got tied up by facilities, so we went back to ethanol.
Yeah, but I suppose there is also keeping your freezer as frost free as well is quite an important step in the whole process.
Yeah. I mean, the issue you're going to have more is if you take it out of -150 or -80, it will get condensation from the atmosphere anyway.
Yes.
But if you get that ice off the rack before you put it back in, then you won't be frost contaminating your -80 freezers.
Yes.
But telling people to keep their -80 freezers in neat and tidy order is a person's own decision. Some freezers are amazing. Some freezers look like a child's bedroom.
Yes, yeah. I remember my days at Pfizer, and yes, depending on the scientist who was in charge of the freezer, it's quite different when you open the door. So are there, we've talked about QR codes, we've talked about data matrix. Is there any newfangled technology out there? I mean,
well, there's one technology that's quite interesting. If you read the patents from the first 2 barcodes that I very first talked about, one of them mentions the use of RFID technology.
Okay.
So it will eventually replace barcodes. 25 years ago, this was written down.
Yeah.
And then people found out that if you use RFID chips, which are commonly used in a wide variety of things, hotel room keys is a good example. And when you pay for things, your phone, that's using a similar kind of technology. But if you use RFID chips, which are minuscule, the size of a grain of rice, and you put it down to cold temperatures, it breaks. In addition, if you irradiate it, which you want to do sometimes for sterility for the thing you're using, the tubes, if you irradiate it, it breaks. You can only read and use and store data on it. You can actually store data on RFID chips, which is quite interesting. You can only read and use and store data on it a certain number of times. If you do it too many times, it breaks.
Okay.
So lots of people try to get the RFID technology up and running. But it didn't really work out too well. When I used to work in my own company, a few years ago, we actually formed a collaboration with a university and the government using a system called KTP, which is UK government R&D structure. And then we went with Hertfordshire University and a scientist who's now a friend of mine, Dr. Wael Gormer, actually joined the company as an expert in wireless communication. And we worked on the RFID solution, and we did actually get an RFID solution working.
Okay.
Currently, we're tagging racks, but that system could be used to tag tubes. So that was the first one I know of people really getting an RFID running. There's a couple of other companies that tried, but they didn't really take off. So I've seen that, and that's the first time I've really seen something working for RFID. The benefit of it is it's not line of sight.
Yeah.
Because you need, if you've got ice on the bottom, you can't use anything that's line of sight. You can't be using a camera or a laser or anything. It's got to use radio waves. So the fact that I mean, this is all down to Whale, not me. Yeah. But the fact that he's cracked that means that could be a future technology. And the core of it, I mean, there's other advantages to it, but the core of it is it allows you to read a rack that's got coated in ice.
But I suppose, is there enough focus to differentiate 96 tubes? I mean, you're talking about you've done it for the rack. That's great. Yeah. But is there enough? If there, A1 and A2, can you differentiate between the two with a radio wave rather than a nice clean light signal?
I can't really talk about it too much because I think that's being worked on.
Right. Yes. But that to me is that's the interesting bit is how big a tower do you suddenly need for your radio signals rather than I had a few ideas. I don't work at Ziath Zenser anymore, but we had a few ideas. And Wales is a smart guy, so they'll crack it.
I think he'll crack it. And then again, I think you'll probably be in the bit where it gets launched, the early adopters will take it, and then it will grow and grow and grow.
Yes, and the prices will come down. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And so I could see that, in 10, 15 years' time, that the RFID tag tube could be the thing that's going to be taken over from 2D barcodes.
Okay. Is there anything else you think, the future? You're out of the industry, so you can probably speak of some of the crazy ideas that might be coming.
Now you've got RFID chips, you can read things with phones.
Right.
Because I said paying with your phone is exactly the same as an RFID chip. So I could see the scanners start disappearing and people starting using their phones.
Right. Okay. So instead of you taking relying on a phone, I'm guessing we've talked about how hard it is to scan a data matrix code. With your phone, that's going to be really quite hard to get the focal length.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, back when we used to sell scanners, it used to be quite funny. I'd always get someone. We used to sell a machine that can read an individual tube.
Yeah.
And I always used to get someone who said to me, "I don't need these." They put out their £1,000 iPhone and sit moving the tube and the phone back and forth for about 5 minutes until finally it read and went, "Look, I don't need your thing."
Yeah.
And I'd say, "How much does that phone cost?" About £1,000. How much does my device cost? 500. And I pick up the tube and go, "Pom, can read it."
Yeah.
So the phones, the cameras in the back of phones are the same, if not better, as what's in the readers, but they're not set up to read it with that focal distance.
Yes.
But with RFID, you can just tap it on the back of the phone and read it just like hey. Now I don't know what people are doing for stuff in the future, but I could see smart racks being something that will you start seeing in about 20 years. The Internet of Things hasn't really taken off the way in which was predicted in the media, but if it does pick back up, then the technology using Internet of Things can start being applied to the labware that we've got, not just in racks, but in all kinds of things.
Right. Yeah. So you can track its position, you can track the conditions it's been in, that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's a few things bodying around that do this, but I can see that becoming more generic. The cost has got to come down, obviously.
Of course, always.
And the usability has got to come down. I mean, one of the things that I always used to say to my colleagues when we're making scanners is, it's just a barcode scanner. Yeah. Someone didn't wake up in the morning to go into the lab to go, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to love scanning racks of barcodes." They're there to do cell biology or medicinal chemistry or molecular biology, or whatever. They're not there to scan your barcodes. So your thing needs to sit in the background.
Yes.
Be as efficient as possible to enable them to do what they've actually come in to do that day.
Yeah.
So essentially, any innovations that come about have to make the job of managing samples easier, not more difficult.
And of course, that's Titian I work for, sample management software is there. You shouldn't really have to read the rack very often. It's unless somebody's dropped everything on the floor or it's the first time you've seen it, sort of thing. It's trying to, if every time you maneuver the rack you've got to scan it, there's something slightly wrong with your process, I think. It's good to have a rack scanner because there are times you definitely need to.
Exactly.
It's not every maneuver. I would say.
Yeah. I mean, even if you were to put an every maneuver, then that's a belt and braces type check, which you'd need in a more medicinal clinical situation, for example. Indeed, but then you should just be confirming your good practice is working.
Yes, and you don't want to be using a flatbed scanner that takes a minute to scan the rack.
It has to be quick.
Yes. Okay, cool. I think that was a great conversation. I hope the audience learned. Is there anything else you want to bring up, or?
No, the only thing I think which is interesting, which is something that I've remarked over the past 30 years, is something I hinted to. When I very first started, my job was to put tubes in racks and go and get samples out of meat freezers to come back again. It was always in the basement. It was always seen as the kind of low level type work. As the time's gone on, sample management has become a discipline. So I think it's one of the interesting points that it's actually something that's grown in importance and significance, and people have actually realised it's a discipline. It's an important part of the drug discovery process with life science and research in general. So it's all very encouraging to me that I've gone from meat freezers in a car park to very large automated stores run by software such as Titian and Raging Back scanners. I think that's is a remarkable achievement. And if you look, there's NASDAQ listed companies now who specialise in sample management.
Indeed.
That wouldn't have happened back then.
And CROs that their main core business is sample management. So yes, again, that wouldn't have happened. So yes, an interesting 30 years.
Exactly.
And we'll see what Neil's future is in the future. I suspect it's not the last we'll hear, but maybe in the sample management world.
Maybe in sample management, maybe in something else. But for now, it's spending a bit more family time for me.
Excellent. The hardest job of them all.
Exactly.
Okay, and the most important. Okay. Anyway, Neil, thank you very much for the discussion, and everybody else, thank you for listening into the latest Voices of Sample Management.